Hey everyone, Matt from Colossum Books here. 2024 has been a very strange and transitionary year for me. A couple things happened in 2024 that if you'd have told me 5-6 years ago, I would have been like, what? Are you sure you're talking about the right person? You know, I moved from New York. You know, I moved out of state. I finished my PhD finally. I got 2 cats. I have 2 cats who I love, and they're both sleeping right now. And I started this channel. This has been my first year booktube. You know, it's not the first year I've been taking reading seriously. I think the last 2 or so years is when I started getting really seriously back into reading after kind of taking an extended break when I started my PhD, just because I got so, you know, sick of reading papers all day and I just couldn't fit more information in my brain. But these last 2 years have been such a great re-exploration of, you know, the more literary, more artistic side, because, you know, I've been kind of neglecting that side for a while. I really feel that 2024 has been my most fulfilling year of reading yet. And part of it is because of this channel and this community, and I just want to thank you all so much for watching. But I did want to talk about my top 5 books of 2024. How I ranked these, just really quickly, is based off of a couple things, mostly the reading experience. Did I find it fun or enjoyable to read, to pick apart, to dissect as I was reading? 2, kind of the lasting impact of the book. Did I put it down and stop thinking about it, or did it kind of stick with me and provide food for thought over the coming weeks, months that I read it? And how rewarding was the reading experience? I think I really connect with books that make me feel rewarded for putting in effort into the books. Like, the more I put in, how much more do I get out of it, you know? So those are kind of my criteria of ranking books. And because of that, there'll be some books on here that might be a little bit surprising, some that you might thought be ranked higher. But again, if I am mentioning in my honorable mentions or my top 5 of the year, they're a good book and you should check them out. I also want to say that if it's a reread, it won't be in the top 5. There's some rereads in the honorable mentions that I'll talk about, but if it's a reread, it's kind of disqualified from the top 5. But anyway, so for the first honorable mention of 2024, I have The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon. You know, the thing that I really appreciate about this book is that, yes, it's Thomas Pynchon. It is, you know, it's layered, it's dense, and it's very loaded, especially for how short this book is. It's thrilling, it's a page turner, it's really fun to read. Like, he makes you put the effort in, but it's also just a good time. It's just a fun time. And I really appreciate that this book can be read very, very closely and very, very carefully. Or if you just kind of want to read a story about a mystery, it also scratches that itch too. I also think that the difficulty of this book is a little bit, it's a little bit exaggerated. So I think that if you're not sure, I think you should just go for it. It's a really great book, a really rewarding book, and a fun read and funny read too. The second honorable mention of 2024 comes from one of my favorite writers of all time, and that is Sula from Toni Morrison, the GOAT, Toni Morrison. I'm, like you guys know, I'm doing an ongoing project of reading all of Toni Morrison's works. This might be not my favorite of hers that she read, but even my least favorite Toni Morrison is still a damn near perfect novel. There is just so much beauty in this book, and like the way that Toni Morrison writes is that just life just leaps off the page. Like, when I read Toni Morrison, it really just reinvigorates my love for reading, for the English language, for storytelling, because she does it like no one else, you know? And the characters she makes, they're just perfect. They're just so good. You know, there is no one that I can point to more when I think about the beauty of writing as an art form than Toni Morrison. It's a beautiful story about community. It's a devastating story, fitting in and conforming to what society expects of you. of these two young women in this book, and I absolutely recommend it. Toni Morrison, the GOAT. Really, really good. Didn't quite make the top 5, but it is well worth the read, and you should just read it because it's a gorgeous book. For the third honorable mention, I am gonna go with Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. This is just, this book is really moving for a couple reasons, but the first one I think of is just, you can feel the love and the passion for writing that Ray Bradbury has while you read this book. Like, each sentence, like, is just soaked with effort and love and beauty, you can tell the amount of effort he put into each sentence in this book. That's one of the critiques people have of this book, is that it feels overwritten, but I didn't see it that way. I saw it as it is like a pure expression for love for literature. It's also just a beautiful, touching story about a father-son relationship and about a friendship. It's perfect for autumn, really great spooky October, Halloween vibes if you're into that. Another thing about Bradbury in this book that I love is that there's just I feel like he can't help but instill his optimism and his love for humanity and people in this book. And it really comes through in this book, especially with the relationship between the main character and his father. I would totally recommend this book. It's so good. If you want to read some nice poetic, fun writing, I would go with Something Wicked This Way Comes. For my fourth honorable mention, is actually a reread, and that is Macbeth by Shakespeare. All I can say about this, it is just so much better than you remember from high school. It's one of those books that I read, and just the interactions between the characters, people don't change. People have been acting the same way and have been behaving the same way and been struggling with the same things since Shakespeare was alive. It has a lot of great commentary on the human condition, people's need for power, like how quickly power corrupts. And I still think that Lady Macbeth is just one of the sickest characters ever. She has some banger lines in here, dude. She really knows how to put a wicked sentence together. So yes, I would say go read this and then watch a play of it, and even maybe read it out loud so you can get the kind of the cadence and the flow of the language. But yes, Macbeth by Shakespeare. It's Shakespeare. What are you gonna do? Okay, last honorable mention of 2024 is Stoner by John Williams. I know this is a BookTube favorite. I know a lot of people absolutely adore this book, and yeah, it is really good. It is really that good. I would even say when people say it's a perfect novel, I really don't even disagree with that. I think it's just really precisely crafted, really it feels like every part of this book is very purposeful, and you can't really trim any fat off of this book. The way I see this book is it is kind of just an ode to the everyman. It is kind of a celebration of futility, and I think John Williams wrote the character William Stoner as kind of a tribute to the average life, and that the average life is really beautiful and worth celebrating. So I know that everyone recommends this book, but it's an amazing book, and I feel like if you're not sure about if you want to get into reading, if reading is your thing, I think this is a great book to start with. Okay, so let's get started with the actual top 5. I know I have a lot of honorable mentions, but it's kind of hard to it was kind of hard to whittle down, and you guys know me. You guys know what you're getting into. Number 5 may come as a surprise to a lot of my viewers because I never talked about reading it, but if you follow me on Goodreads, you'll have seen that I read it and I loved it. But that is A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. So this book is a little bit contentious. People either love it or hate it. It really, really worked for me. I found that this book was just beautifully crafted. I felt that this was written with the precision of like an artisan. It really impressed me how each chapter is a short story surrounding the same few characters, and they're not chronological, they're all like scattered throughout time. Just how perfectly each section kept in mind all the other sections, and just how consistent it was. And one thing that happens in one section manifests in all the other sections in just such a beautiful and almost perfect way. I really loved the themes and the layers in this book. This book is so layered. To me, it always felt like you could go deeper in it, though it's not too difficult to read. Like I felt like every time I peeled a layer, it was very satisfying, and there's always more waiting for me. And some of the themes that really stuck out to me are kind of themes that I feel, or I have been feeling and kind of thinking about a lot lately in my life. One just being like the incredibly minute, the incredibly small and seemingly inconsequential compromises you make on a day-to-day life, accumulating and compiling over years and years, so that before you know it, you are a completely different person. And it's all because of these tiny compilations of tiny little compromises that pile up throughout your life. Just how profoundly different you can be when you are at point B looking back at point A. Something I really loved about this book is its view on humanity and redemption, like where redemption doesn't always have to be this huge heroic moment where you right all your wrongs and anything you've ever done wrong you make up for and then some. But redemption can really just be returning back to equilibrium, or returning back to normalcy and accepting your flaws and your past mistakes. It's just so beautiful. And I am going to make a full video on this, but I was shocked by how moved I was by this book. You know, people change, things change, and that's just part of being human. That's just part of life. So yes, Visit from the Goon Squad, my number 5 book of 2024. You might love it, you might hate it. I loved it. So, okay, so for book number 4 of 2024, it is Giovanni's Room by the mastermind, the great James Baldwin. This is, without a doubt, the most emotionally striking book I've ever read in my whole life. I think I called it, when I first reviewed it, the most devastating book I've ever read, and I still feel that way. Devastating to the point where it is like upsetting and almost disturbing, honestly. First of all, with James Baldwin, like, you are going to get just some beautiful prose, just lush prose, very thoughtful, very introspective writing. But you know what really got to me about this book, and like I read this way back in March and I still think about it like all the time, is just the consequences of lying to yourself. And that lying to yourself is not a victimless crime, because if you're lying to yourself, you're lying to everyone else around you, you know, and that can put you in situations where you can't find your footing, and you have to keep lying to yourself and everyone else, and just how devastating that can be to the people you love and the people around you. It tackles that question of like the fear of confronting yourself about your true feelings, your true thoughts. Like, what does that say about you? What do your true thoughts say about you? How do you handle them? David, the main character in this book, is just such a thoughtful and eloquent and articulate guy, and he can perfectly articulate these emotions and feelings that I think are human and universal, but his inability to act on his feelings, or his hesitance and his fear to act on these feelings, gets pushed to the extreme, to the point where there are some devastating consequences. And I just think it's heartbreaking. It's just a heartbreaking, emotionally compelling and devastating book. And I think if there is any book that I have mentioned out of this whole video, for everyone to read, it should be this book. I do think this is a perfect novel. I don't think there is a flaw in this book. And it's at number 4, so that tells you something about the rest of this list. James Baldwin, Giovanni's Room. Please, please, please go read it. I knew this was gonna happen. I knew I was gonna get to like talk way too much about each book. Okay, so books number 3 and number 2 are the reason why I kind of put off putting out this video, because I couldn't decide between the two, which one goes to 3, which one goes to 2. I mean, I knew what my number 1 spot would be, I knew what my number 5 and 4 would be, but 2 and 3 were really, really difficult for me to choose. And I think maybe depending on the day, I might give you a different answer, but I feel confident this is how I feel now, because this is just where my intuition leads me. For number 3, by the way, 3, 2, and 1, books 3, 2, and 1 on this list are also just going to be all-timers for me. These are some of the best books I've ever read. But that being said, number 3 is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. God, this book is just, from the first page to the last, it is a moving, beautiful experience. Like, it feels, when I think about the characters in this book, I don't feel like I'm recalling a book. I feel like I am recalling a memory of people I actually know. This book is exactly like life. There are so many devastating moments. There are so many beautiful moments. And some of the conversations in this book just scratch that itch you feel for human connection and meaningful conversation. What does it mean to be a good person? Like, how do you become a good person? What are the choices that, when you get to the end of your life, what are the choices you make that someone can categorize you as a good or a bad person? And the thing I love about this book is it is so, like, it is full of tragedy, it's full of devastating moments, but I look back at this book, even though it's so sad, I look back at this book and my brain categorizes it as like an optimistic and a hopeful book, a very hopeful, happy, optimistic book. And at the end of the day, it really just makes you want to be a better person, which is like, oh, now that I talk about it, I kind of want to put it up to number 2, but I'm sure I'll go through the same kind of thing when I talk about my number 2 spot. But yeah, it just a completely beautiful book. And if you're trying to get into classics, I think this is a good one to start with if you're okay with reading a longer book. East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This is going to be one of my all-time favorites forever, I think. Okay, so for my number 2 spot, my number 2 spot, yes, it is going to be Infinite Jest. And it's funny, I feel like if you ask me which novel I think is better, like a better book, like a better novel between East of Eden and Infinite Jest, I'd probably honestly tell you East of Eden, but I think just the reading experience of this book was so rewarding, and it just became such a personal thing by the end of it. Like, I really connected with this book and ended up having such a personal relationship with this book. Like, I read a lot of myself in this book, and it helped me reflect a lot about who I am. And I've talked everyone's ear off about this book. I have a review on it, so I'm not going to get too much into it, but what I will say is that this book is just about how unbelievably difficult it is to be a human being and to deal with the constant pressures of humanity and human life in the 21st century. It was written in 1996, so it was the 20th century, but it's a very prophetic book. So I will just say You know, it's a beautiful book. It's a flawed book, but you know, the flaws in this book are kind of what makes it an even more genuine and human book. I have more thoughts on it in my review, so I'm not going to rehash it. I've talked about this book a lot, so I will spare you from that. Number 2, Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. Okay, and I get so excited when I talk about my number 1 book of the year. My number 1 book of the year is The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. This book, I mean, it sincerely changed the way I interact with literature, like the way I interact with art as a whole. This book, it taught me that what you put into a book or art is what you get out of it. You know, I have never had such a rewarding reading experience in my whole life than with this book. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, it is a tough nut to crack, but working for those little chips, there's almost nothing like it. Making those connections and figuring out what's going on, it's just so rewarding. On top of that, it is just a beautiful story. It talks a lot about destiny, like what it means to have a legacy as a family, the tensions that can arise within a family, how different people react to the same stressors, even if they're from the same family. And you know, this book is just like, it's perfectly paced, where by the end of each section, you finally understand this character's voice. You finally can flow with it and understand what they want to communicate, and that's when the section ends. It just makes you want to go back and reread the whole thing over and over again. And some of the shit that Faulkner, I'm not going to say gets away with, the stuff that he pulls off in this book, it blows my mind that this book was written in the 20s. Like it's so experimental, but the thing is, it's experimental in the sense that like, it's experimental, but it's fair. It's fair, and it expects a lot out of the reader, but the rules are there. The story and the narrative is there. You just got to work for it a little bit. Cracking that character's brain and finally understanding who they are and what they're trying to communicate it's so rewarding, and you feel so connected to each of the characters by the end. And I love that it starts with the most difficult section, and then each section gets easier as like Faulkner is actually rewarding the reader for getting through it, you know? I have a review on this one. I don't think there's a flaw with this book. I do think this book is completely perfect. I wouldn't change a sentence, a word, a period in this book. And you know, my favorite chapter of this book is the second one with Quentin. Some of the stylistic choices that Faulkner makes in that section are just inspiring. Like, not just as in, like, not even in an artistic sense, but like the fact that he could pull off some of the wildest writing I've ever read and make it make sense and still be beautiful and tell a coherent and incredible story, to me is inspiring in like my day-to-day life. If Faulkner had the courage to write this book and get away with what he got away with stylistically, then like, why can't I do what my goals are? You know what I mean? Like, that's how much this book has affected me. That's my number 1 book. So just to recap, here is my top 5. You know, I just want to thank you all so much for watching, so much for being here and commenting and hanging out and, you know, giving me your thoughts on the books and leaving such nice comments. It's been such a cool year. It's been such a rewarding year for reading, and I just am so glad I made this channel. And, I've met so many cool people through BookTube. And I've gotten so many cool perspectives I never would have in my normal life through BookTube. And I just want to thank you all so much for watching and so much for being here. I hope you guys had a good new year, and I hope that 2025 is good to you all. I will talk to you all very soon. And again, just thanks. Peace.